Good evening. I'm Juan Maldonado, President of the New York City Bar Association. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg Distinguished Lecture on Women and the Law. Tonight's lecture will be presented by the Honorable Anne Claire Williams, who will be introduced by Justice Ginsburg. This lecture series began in November of 2000, and it was first conceived to, of course, have a platform in which to have an informed discussion about issues involving women and the law. But we began the series for a second reason, and I quote, "To recognize Justice Ginsburg's groundbreaking contributions to the advancement of women's rights and her achievements as a lawyer, law professor, and judge." This will be the 17th lecture in the series, which we are now hosting on an annual basis, for which we are very grateful to Justice Ginsburg. The speakers at this lecture series, like Judge Williams, are all distinguished and well-known lawyers, judges, scholars, and public figures. And we ask them here to come and share with us their views on developments and issues involving women in the law and women in the legal profession, and they're not always quite the same thing. Justice Ginsburg is always instrumental in selecting the speakers, and at her request, the City Bar, and I know this has got to hurt some of you, offers on a complimentary basis to each law school in the New York City area seats. And the idea is to attract, to come to participate in this wonderful event, our youngest members. This event, this lecture series, is at the core of what the City Bar has been trying to be doing for at least several decades, to do what we can to promote the progress of women in the law and to promote women's rights in general. As president of the City Bar, I have the privilege of participating in many wonderful events hosted in this very elegant meeting hall. But I have to say, there is no one event that energizes the crowd like this one does. And it's not just my impression. I've discussed with those who organize these events from year to year, and I asked, what is it? What creates this buzz? And I got varying answers to my question, but there were a couple of central themes. This lecture series gives women and men of all ages the opportunity to come together to thank Justice Ginsburg for all that she has done to promote equal justice, the equal application of the law here in the United States. But this also serves as a forum for all present to recognize and honor Justice Ginsburg for the sheer grit, courage, and determination that she demonstrates in everything that she does. For these reasons and more, please give Justice Ginsburg a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, and everyone, please be seated. You are in for something very special tonight. When the Honorable Anne Claire Williams agreed to deliver this evening's lecture, I was overjoyed. Judge Williams has performed with uncommon wisdom, good humor, and style just about every role a lawyer or a judge could play. Starting out, a law clerk to a federal appellate judge, assistant U.S. attorney, adjunct professor at Northwestern University School of Law, U.S. district judge, circuit judge, and eventually chief judge of the court she once served as a law clerk the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. Currently, she is a leader of Jones Day trial and appellate practices, and she heads the firm's efforts to advance the rule of law in Africa. She has been appointed by the Chief Justice of the United States to leadership posts in the U.S. Judicial Conference, the policymaking and rule-developing body for the federal judiciary. And that recitation is not even close to a complete list. The Federal Judicial Center regularly enlists her to train new judges. She serves on the Supreme Court Fellows Commission. She was treasurer and then president of the Federal Judges Association, the organization concerned with the well-being of federal judges. In the good job I have now held for nigh on to 26 years, one must learn to say no. But when a request comes from Ann Williams, I do not follow Nancy Reagan's advice. I just say yes. I have spoken at Notre Dame, the university from which she holds her JD degree and serves as a member of the board of directors. And I have participated in programs at the Supreme Court for an organization she founded, Just the Beginning, which inspires and equips students of color and other underrepresented groups to pursue careers in the law. The honors Judge Williams has received and the board on which she has sat or is currently sitting runs pages long. Notable awards include the Edward J. Devitt Distinguished Service to Justice Award. It is the foremost award a federal district court or court of appeals judge can receive. She's also a recipient of the American Bar Association's Margaret Brent Award, honoring lawyers and judges who have made huge contributions to the advancement of women in the legal profession. Various publications have named her as one of the world's most influential, powerful, and fearless women. For many years, Judge Williams has worked tirelessly to advance the effective delivery of justice worldwide, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe and in Africa. She left the federal judiciary so that she could intensify her efforts to promote secure legal systems in African nations. Last summer, Judge Williams and I joined the Loyola Chicago Law Faculty Summer Program in Rome. The time spent with her in that eternal city was a delight for me, a pleasure I hope I will experience again and again. She is such good company, adventurous, blessed with a keen sense of humor, and a great guide to good shopping as well. Please join me now in heartily welcoming to the podium world-celebrated jurist and my treasured friend, Judge Ann Claire Williams.
Well, how do you top that? Good evening.
Good evening.
And I think we could get a little louder here. We have Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the house. Good evening. Woo! Thank you very much, Justice Ginsburg, for the opportunity to be here tonight and for that kind and generous introduction. and I promise I'll get this jacket for you. It is an incredible honor to follow in the footsteps of the amazing women who have given this lecture before. I thank the City Bar for extending that invitation to me, and I thank my dear, dear friend, Justice Ruth Ginsburg, a little black girl from Detroit who didn't know a lawyer or a judge, whose favorite was Perry Mason because he came to our house every week, who knew about Thurgood Marshall but never imagined that I would stand before you in a room like this for this purpose. As I look out, I see so many friends and colleagues in my second city, New York, because, you know, Chicago is my first city. People who have supported me throughout my career. Thank you, and I want to also thank my husband, who's been incredibly supportive, and we will be celebrating our 40th anniversary this summer. David Stewart. When I was thinking about what message I could share with you, I kept coming back to three words: equal justice lives. Equal justice lives. Equal justice lives in our minds, our actions, and our hearts. I know in these times we're living in, sometimes we question whether equal justice lives because of the challenges we face as a nation and as Americans. The challenges are many and monumental. Threats to our rights, women's rights, the independence of the judiciary, the freedom of the press, huge educational, healthcare, and economic disparities, a rise in hate crimes, religious intolerance, gun violence, mass incarceration, anti-immigration, anti-LGBTQ movements, and a broken criminal justice system. And last, but certainly not least, the huge political divide we face. While these challenges may seem insurmountable, it is especially important now that we do all that we can to make equal justice live. We can make the difference. It is the only way we will get through it. We can make the difference in moving our country forward, our communities forward, no matter what our political views. When equal justice lives in our minds, our actions, and our hearts, our minds develop the strategies, our actions execute the plan, and our hearts keep us going. I get my inspiration, my commitment, my belief in equal justice from some of the women I will tell you about tonight. Now, we all know that equal justice surely lives in the incredible Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, infused in her spirit as a young girl, through her years as a professor and founder of the ACLU Women's Project, and her time as a justice and judge. Tonight, I want to share with you stories of women in whom equal justice lives from my two worlds. First, the women of the federal judiciary. I was incredibly blessed, as Justice Ginsburg said, to serve as a United States judge for nearly 33 years. Through opportunities like teaching new federal judges in baby judges school for 7 years, including Justice Sonia Sotomayor, from participating in the Federal Judges Association and serving on different committees in the Judicial Conference, I had a chance to meet and learn from trailblazing women. And then there's my second world, beginning with my trip to Ghana in 2002 and continuing with my visits to Kenya, Liberia, Nigeria, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda, leading trainings of judges and lawyers, working with the State Department, prosecutors' offices, defense offices, other government agencies, African not-for-profit organizations, the National Institute for Trial Advocacy, Lawyers Without Borders, and others to advance the rule of law. I'm blessed to be able to work now full-time on advancing the rule of law in my role at Jones Day. These two worlds, both with groundbreaking women judges and lawyers, are really one story, the story of women making equal justice live. And how have they done that? Like Justice Ginsburg, they all share 5 common values. They dream big, work hard, never give up, stand up, and give back. 5 lessons that all of us, wherever we are in our careers, just starting off or well on our way, can use to ensure that equal justice lives. Say it with me. Dream big. Work hard. Never give up. Stand up. And give back. First, dream big. Big, impossible dreams. When Justice Ginsburg was born in 1933, there was only one woman on the federal bench. That's it. Ruth's mother encouraged her to be independent and self-sufficient. And as Ruth said, it was, quote, an unusual message for mothers of that time to be giving their daughters, end quote. Justice Ginsburg's mother passed away a day before her high school graduation, and when she was nominated to the Supreme Court, she said, "I pray that I may be all that she would have been," end quote. And she wished her mother could experience a world where women could aspire and achieve, and daughters are just as cherished as sons. Ruth's big dreams began with her mother and her family. Judge Phyllis Kravitz was born in Savannah, Georgia, 13 years before Justice Ginsburg. Most prominent white lawyers in Savannah would not accept appointments from the court to defend a black person in a criminal case, but her dad did. He felt equality under the law meant there were no color lines. So it was usually her father who would be appointed in highly unpopular cases representing black people. As a result, when she was 12, Phyllis was the only little girl in her Girl Scout troop that was not invited to a birthday party. Her words, "My father's way of consoling me because I was quite upset about it was to explain the Constitution and the Sixth Amendment." And finally realizing it wasn't getting through to me, he said, "When you're a little older, you'll understand that there are more important things in life than birthday parties." I didn't understand it at the time, but as time went by, I knew exactly what he meant. Inspired by her father, Phyllis began to dream big, even though virtually no women in the South were practicing law at the time. As a teenager, when she was at the courthouse to watch one of her father's cases, he pulled her aside and said, "The judge wants you to leave. He doesn't think this is a place for a young woman." But Phyllis found one of her dad's black employees who took her to the segregated balcony upstairs where black people had to sit to watch court. She hid there and watched her dad's cases. She ultimately became one of the first women trial lawyers in the South and the first woman in the Southeast and the third nationwide to become a federal appellate judge. She dreamed big, impossible dreams. Constance Baker Motley, who was born a year after Judge Kravitz, decided she wanted to be a lawyer at 15. No one thought this was a good idea. Her mother thought she should be a hairdresser. As Judge Motley said, with very little opportunity for employment or advancement by blacks or women, there were those who actively discouraged me from thinking about the law. For some reason, this lack of encouragement never deterred me. In fact, I think the effect was just the opposite. I was the kind of person who would not be put down. I rejected the notion that my race or sex would bar my success in life, end quote. As many of you here know, she went on to become the first woman of color to be a federal judge in this country in the Southern District of New York. She dreamt big, big, impossible dreams. Chief Justice Georgina Wood, the first woman Chief Justice in Ghana, dreamed of a courthouse dedicated to gender-based violence. For years, she met much resistance. She created a plan, though, and held fast to that dream. Fighting many years, finally, the Gender-Based Violence Court, which focuses on resolving domestic violence cases in a speedy manner, opened in Accra, and it was so successful that 2 others have followed. Chief Justice Wood was dreaming big, impossible dreams, and making them come true, dreaming big for equal justice. Second, work hard. Work hard. Justice Ruth didn't always want to be a judge, and she said she never thought becoming a judge was possible. Most of the women on the bench before Judge Ginsburg didn't set their sights on becoming judges either. Simply entering the legal profession as a woman was challenging enough. Florence Allen was a music critic for the Cleveland newspaper in 1906 when she got interested in law. But she couldn't get a law degree from Western Reserve University in Cleveland because it didn't admit women. So she went to NYU Law School and supported herself working to help newly arrived immigrants and lecturing on music for the Board of Education, graduating second in her class, just like Justice Ginsburg, and number one, no offers from New York firms. So she went back home to Cleveland making $25 her first month as a lawyer. As she said, I had no clients and I had no money, but I had great hopes. To gain experience, she volunteered for the Legal Aid Society, including tireless efforts visiting 70 Ohio counties working for the woman's right to vote. The 19th Amendment was finally passed on June 4th, 1919, 100 years and 1 week ago. She became the first woman elected to judicial office in the United States and also the first elected to the highest court in the state. All those people she met in those 70 counties remembered her and even formed Florence Allen clubs when she was running for the Ohio Supreme Court. She later became the first woman Article III federal judge when Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed her to the Sixth Circuit in 1934. On the bench, her work ethic, just like Justice Ginsburg's, was legendary. Florence Allen said she wrote more opinions than she could count, explaining once while laughing, I never totaled them up. I never had time. When I finished with one group of cases, I just went right to the next batch, working hard, incredibly hard. All over Africa, there are women judges, attorneys, and paralegals working hard to promote the rule of law. Two recent examples. A prosecutor at a training program I led in Tanzania traveled 7 hours across Tanzania with her 8-year-old baby because she was eager for the training that we were giving and she wanted to nurse her baby, so she brought her along. Or a magistrate I met in Liberia, stationed far from the big city, Monrovia, who works from sunup to sundown to write judgments as quickly as she can while there's electricity, because there's none at her home, working hard to make equal justice live. Number 3, don't give up. Don't give up. In Kenya, about 10 years ago, FIDA, the Association of Women Lawyers, and CREW, the Center for Rights, Education, and Awareness, knew how critical it was to get the Sexual Offenses Act passed. They pushed hard. It was groundbreaking legislation, but there was one provision they couldn't support. Section 38 said a victim could be prosecuted if a case was lost for making false allegations and subject to the same sentence as a convicted rapist. Now, FIDA knew that that provision would have a chilling effect on reporting rapes because if the defendant was acquitted, the victim could be charged for making a false allegation. But it became clear the act would never be passed without that provision. So what did FIDA do? The choice, the act with the bad provision or no act at all. They figured it would be better to get the act passed, but they did not give up. After the act was passed, they filed a lawsuit arguing that Section 38 was unconstitutional, and they won. They never gave up on justice. Equal justice, lives step by step, inch by inch. As you know, even with her stellar performance at Harvard and Columbia, no law firms would hire Justice Ginsburg. Finally, her professor gave Judge Paula Mary on the Southern District of New York an ultimatum: unless he gave Ruth a chance, he'd never recommend another Columbia student to him. And of course, he had a man as a backup in case Justice Ginsburg failed in the clerkship, but we know she didn't. Justice Ginsburg said about those widespread rejections, quote, "So in life, things that you regard as an impediment turn out to be a great good fortune." So what does that mean? We take those doors that are closed and we find a way to open them up. If that door won't open, we knock on another door. We don't give up. Ruth's wisdom rings true for Phyllis Kravitz, who was turned down by a Supreme Court justice who said no woman had clerked at the court. He didn't want to break the precedent. All the law firms turned her down, so she returned to Savannah to work with her dad. She never gave up. Of course, strength in the face of adversity isn't always about battling discrimination. Sometimes it's about strength in the face of health challenges, as Justice Ginsburg knows and has triumphed over such challenges. One of my mentors, Judge Diana Murphy of the Eighth Circuit, born 1 year after Justice Ginsburg, didn't take a traditional path. With a graduate degree in history, she married, had 2 sons, and then went to law school, graduating 20 years after her undergrad degree. She was the first woman appointed to the Eighth Circuit. She waited about 17 years for another woman to be appointed to that court. All alone, all those years, 9 men appointed in the interim. Although you wouldn't have known it, Diana Murphy suffered from severe rheumatoid arthritis, and it increased with intensity every year. But in 1999, while she was a busy judge on the Eighth Circuit, she took on another enormous responsibility, chair of the United States Sentencing Commission, where she successfully fought to reduce the horrible crack and powder cocaine disparity in sentencing, and she was successful. As Judge Lebedoff reflected, quote, "In all the many years of our friendship, I never heard Diana complain to me or anyone else about her physical difficulties. Her strength of character would not allow her to lessen her legal or community service at a cost that she kept to herself," end quote. Her responsibilities as head of the Sentencing Commission required her to make frequent flights to Washington. She typically handled both duties in a brilliant fashion without complaint at a physical cost known only to herself. He continues, Diana faced a physical challenge that would have left most men and women housebound and defeated it by ignoring it. She never gave up. Number 4, stand up, and keep your cool. Stand up and keep your cool. Our federal bench has been blessed with Justice Ginsburg since her appointment to the D.C. Circuit in 1980. At that time, women made up 4% of the bench. Now there are 362 women of the 1,337 Article III judges who are currently sitting, or 27% of the judiciary. That's progress. Of course, as Justice Ginsburg has said, when asked if 3 justices were enough, 3 women, she said, well, I'll be happy when it's 9. Of those women judges, 91 are women of color, and since the beginning, there have been 56 African-American women, 15 of Asian-American heritage, and 30 of Latina heritage. Since the creation of the judiciary in 1789, that's less than 12% of the people appointed to judgeships who have been women, and less than 3% have been women of color. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go, but we will not give up, and we will keep marching on. Part of Justice Ginsburg's legacy is her commitment to the women's place on the bench. She said, people certainly know that women are present on the court. We are all over the bench. We are certainly here to stay. Here to stay. And do I get an amen on that? Amen. Before Ruth's appointment, Connie Motley took similar positions, saying in one case while denying a petition to recuse because of her gender, quote, if background or sex or race of each judge were by definition sufficient grounds for removal, no judge on this court could hear this case, end quote. In 1979, Judge Gabby McDonald was the first African-American woman, the first African-American to be appointed to the bench in Texas and in the South. 2 years later, the Ku Klux Klan tried to disqualify Gabby in a case involving Vietnamese shrimpers who were suing the Ku Klux Klan for burning several of their shrimp boats. She received hate mail, including 4 one-way tickets to Africa. Klan members attended the hearings, A metal detector was installed in the courthouse. Gabby stood her ground and would not recuse herself. She said to the Klan members, quote, "You are not entitled to a judge of your choosing, but one who will be fair, and I will do that." A few years later, Gabby refused to recuse herself at the Houston City Council, asserting after the Houston City Council claimed that as a black woman, she was a member of the class that would benefit from the suit. She said, "If my race is enough to disqualify me from hearing this case, then I must disqualify myself as well as from a substantial portion of cases on my docket, an action that would cripple my efforts to fulfill my oath as a federal judge." Gabby McDonald, standing up to the challenge, never backing down, standing up. Phyllis Kravitz's father refused to follow the practice in the South of referring to black witnesses by their first names, not calling them Mr., Ms., or Mrs. When Phyllis called a black witness Mrs., the judge called her back into chambers and chewed her out. Undeterred, Phyllis went right back out, got on the record, and called her witness Mrs. I remember the first time I met Phyllis Kravitz. You'd never guess it from these stories, but she was about 5 feet tall. She stood up for so much throughout her life, but she also knew how to keep her cool. One of my favorite stories is it was one of her first panels on the Fifth Circuit. Phyllis traveled to New Orleans and was waiting for a cab, and it was pouring rain outside. 2 men cut in front of her and jumped into the cab, one saying he had somewhere important to be. So Phyllis caught the next cab. She didn't want to be late for this oral argument. At the oral argument that morning, you can guess, the man who had taken her cab looked up to see Phyllis Kravitz on the bench. As one of her colleagues said, and I quote, "I wondered why that lawyer's brief was so good, but he could barely say anything at oral argument." Connie Motley kept her cool too. She said one of the most critical lessons she learned from Thurgood Marshall, because she was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and won like 9 out of 10 cases, although it really was 10 out of 10, because she had a Batson case, a case that had to do with jury discrimination. The Supreme Court ruled against her when she brought it, but years later, Batson was decided, so she had a 10-10 record. She said, "One of the critical lessons I learned from Thurgood Marshall was to laugh off these ludicrous anti-feminist affronts which were regularly hurled in my direction. Laugh them off. Keep on standing. Don't give up." Of course, one of Justice Ginsburg's strengths is her collegial personality, staying calm but fierce. Her famous friendship with Justice Scalia is an example. But she's not afraid to stand up and speak out when she feels there are important interests at stake. As she said, "I will never compromise when it's a question of freedom of speech, press, or gender equality." Similarly, Phyllis Kravitz, her colleague Tom Clark said, quote, "All of us seek approval of others. It makes us feel good. But there are times in life when the crowd may be moving in an errant direction, and one must be courageous enough to take a stand against the majority." Phyllis Kravitz has always been courageous. At times, she has been a minority of one. In every instance, she has abided by what she thought was right. She has never gone along to get along. The power of one. One voice, one woman making a difference. So don't say to me, "I don't have power, I'm powerless." When I was a baby lawyer, I helped start an organization to help people pass the bar. Now more than 4,000 people have passed the bar, and law schools from in the Illinois area send students there. We started out focusing on students of color, but it's open to everyone. I was just one baby assistant U.S. attorney who got some of her friends, all these other ones, and we gathered together and we made things happen. So you can make things happen. Justice Ginsburg's push for women leaders and decision makers isn't limited to the bench. Her quote, "Women belong in all places where decisions are made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception." Phyllis Kravitz stood up for this principle in 1975 when she, a seasoned litigator, was told she was going to be nominated as secretary of the Savannah Bar. She said, "Well, I won't accept the secretary position because that's for someone right out of law school, and I've been practicing over 20 years. She said several young women had been admitted to practice, so one of them could be secretary, one of the men could be secretary. A couple of days later, the same man called her back and said, "I told the nominating committee what you said, and now they want to make you president." She was nominated, nobody opposed, and she was the first president of the Savannah Bar. Phyllis Kravitz, standing up. We know equal justice lived in her. Mumbi Ngugi was a talented, committed advocate when I first met her in one of the training programs I did in Kenya, a bright, shining star. But she stood out because in the East African legal community, she was an albino. In her words, it had never been easy, especially when a large portion of society is avoiding you, convinced we were intellectually challenged or a bad omen or just objects of curiosity. Growing up, I avoided social places and public events as much as possible as it was really uncomfortable, especially when people would come too close to check to see if I was a real African. And albinism, you know, is when you have no melatonin in your skin, and so you're extremely pale. When she was a young girl, doctors didn't realize she needed glasses with special lenses to protect her eyes from the sun. She wears very thick glasses now, and she didn't even know about sunscreen until she was 17 years old. And yet she stood up, facing prejudices, not only become a lawyer, but is now a well-respected judge in the High Court of Kenya, the only person who's an albino. She founded the Albinism Foundation in East Africa, working to ensure social acceptance and tangible assistance to people with that condition. She always asked me to bring sunscreen so she can distribute it to the children. A remarkable woman who stood up to discrimination and doubt and triumphed, standing up for herself, her community, and justice. Standing up for justice, equal justice lives in Mumbi. Fifth, give back, give back. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor once said, quote, "We don't accomplish anything in this world alone, and whatever happens is the result of the whole tapestry of one's life, and all the threads and all the weavings of individual threads from one to another that create something, weaving threads that create justice." During an annual judges meeting in Kenya that I attended, the Women Judges Association visited a local orphanage. They donated computers from money collected from all the judges. The kids were excited, and as we picked up the children and gave them big hugs, tears were in our eyes. Judges giving back to children and seeing joy, weaving their individual threads together to create a beautiful tapestry in this orphanage. And Justice Martha Koome, now on the Court of Appeal in Kenya, who was in one of my first classes, realizing how juveniles are caught up in the criminal justice system, languishing in custody for years, setting up for the first time service weeks to review cases and to get dismissals or plea agreements or pretrial diversion. Hundreds of young people were freed. Working with Ann Amadi, the court's chief administrator, the program spread throughout Kenya. Women rising to power, women who have not forgotten the less fortunate, women who realize justice is critical, giving back for justice. Equal justice lives in them. Just like Justice Ruth Ginsburg, who, in addition to all she's done in the law, raising two remarkable children, Jane and James, with her beloved husband, Marty, always and continually gives back. I experienced this firsthand in 2001. Justice Ginsburg wrote me a letter after she saw me introduce President Bush at the White House when I was president of the Federal Judges Association. She wrote in part, quote, "I was particularly impressed by your words at the White House. Remarks at once wise and witty, You conveyed your message in such an appealing way, one can hope the second branch really listened. With every good wish for your life and work's next chapter, end quote. I kept this letter. You know I did. I still have it 18 years later. It had a huge impact on me. I had met her before, of course, as a baby judge, but I was so blown away, so in awe, I could barely say, "Good morning, Justice Ginsburg." I thought I was so special until I learned that she does these things all the time. Because she's a mentor to everyone. Many of the women in whom equal justice lives are devoted to mentorship. Diana Murphy, who I mentioned, came into my life 1 year after I was on the bench. I was still a baby judge. She and Betty Fletcher took me under their wing, becoming a mentor and sponsor, encouraging me to be active in the Federal Judges Association. Both of them were founders of the Federal Judges Association, the only women. Now we have 1,100 district and court of appeals judges fighting for independence and fair pay for the judiciary, supporting me as I rose, helping me step by step to become the first judge of color to be president of that organization. She also said yes, and you know Justice Ginsburg says I often get people to say yes. But she said yes when I asked her to be the first board member of what is now the Equal Justice Works Fellowship Program. We have now had more than 2,000 fellowships given to recent law graduates for public service. I started that program with a $2.3 million Cypre fund in a case I had as a district judge, and I appointed Diana Murphy as one of the first board members. Diana Murphy, always finding time to give back. Connie Motley, who mentored me from the beginning when I became a baby judge, was a stalwart in the first Just the Beginning conference that we held in Chicago in 1992. One of her first mentors was Clarence Blakesley, a white businessman from her hometown who heard her give a speech, wondered why she was not in college, learned she couldn't afford it, and then paid for her college and law school education. Mentors come in every race, every color, every creed. You never know who's going to extend that hand out to you. And when you work hard and you strive for excellence, those hands come along. And then the great Thurgood Marshall, Connie said, if it hadn't been for Thurgood Marshall, no one would ever have heard of Constance Baker Motley. Connie inspired me to strive to practice humility and commitment to equal justice under the law. Justice Sotomayor also looked to Judge Motley's wisdom at a pivotal moment in her life when her name was first floated for the Supreme Court. Justice Sotomayor, because she's so methodical, took out a yellow pad and made a list of pros and cons. The con list was longer, but she recalled what Judge Motley said to her: when you have a chance to open the door for others, you don't have a right to say no. When you have a chance to open the door, you don't have a right to say no. Fortunately, Justice said yes. As Justice Thurgood Marshall said, none of us got where we are solely by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We got here because somebody bent down and helped us pick up our boots. Like all of you, I have been blessed throughout my legal career. Whether you're law students that are here, or you're friends of law students, or you're lawyers, or you're judges, I've been blessed with an abundance of somebodies from many walks of life. But the most important somebodies in my life were my parents, Joshua and Dorothy, who both passed at 92. They brought home to me the importance of dreaming big, impossible dreams, working hard, not giving up, standing up, and giving back. As blacks, they could not get work in their fields in the 40s, even though they both had college degrees. My mom, with a degree in home economics, couldn't get a job as a full-time public school teacher, so she taught at a home for delinquent children for 12 years, then was able to be a sub, and finally, after 17 years, a full-time school teacher. My dad, with a degree in political science and psychology, tried to sell insurance but failed, didn't sell one policy. So he drove a bus for 20 years in Detroit, like many black and well-educated men that were professional men who couldn't find jobs. After about 20 years, he applied to be a supervisor, and he was told by his white boss he couldn't handle it, even though my father had been a staff sergeant in the Army during World War II and basically ran the company. He became fed up, quit his job after he had enough money in his pension to go back to school, and as fate would have it, Daddy and I were in classes together at Wayne State. Me with a major in elementary education and Daddy getting his extra degree. And it wasn't until a speech class where I was told to talk about who I admired the most in my life that it hit me. College degree, bus driver, college degree. Because, of course, I loved his job. I thought he was so handsome, and, and I love clothes. So, I loved how he looked. And I could run up and down the bus, and I could roll the quarters and dimes. There are a few people in this audience that remember when you could put coins in the box for the bus. And so I went home and I said, Daddy, how could you stand this? You had a college degree. And he said, no one can take my education away. Being a bus driver is good, honest, decent work. I did what I had to do. I wanted to make it better for you and your sisters, your two sisters, so you could have a better life. And my father was very funny. And I said his, minor was in psychology. He said, plus, I used a lot of psychology with the people on the bus. My parents participated in the civil rights movement and taught me about equal justice. And so I have tried to live my life doing what I do, standing on the shoulders of the many somebodies who have come before me, who blaze a trail for me, like Justice Ginsburg, lighting the way for me, instilling in me the belief that equal justice, what? Lives. Indeed, all of us in this room have been blessed, have benefited from the sacrifice of those who believed in us, and equal justice who lit the way for us to be in this room. There are somebodies who've made a difference in each of your lives. Our elders, our ancestors paved the way for us, whether they came to America by force as slaves like my people, or whether they chose to come to America seeking a better life, fleeing the potato famine in Ireland, the Holocaust in Germany, poverty in Mexico, or political oppression in South America, Africa, Russia, Asia, or the Middle East. They all believed in the American dream, and those signs engraved in all of our courthouses all over America. Equal justice for all. The obstacles we face today, however monumental, pale by comparison when you look at their struggles and hardships. Standing on their shoulders, we can and must rise up to face our nation's current challenges. We must be those somebodies for somebody else, using our light of justice to encourage people to vote, to participate in our society, to stand up. We must be the light of justice in not just our minds, but in our hearts and our actions, because here's the question. If we don't, who will? If we don't, who will? I have seen equal justice living in many incredible women serving in our judiciary and in Africa, working tirelessly to improve the rule of law. That's what inspires me. That's what keeps me going. That's why I have hope in America. That's why I keep going back to Africa. I see the light of justice in their eyes, and it keeps the light burning in mine. Despite all the challenges in our world, there is a light of hope, optimism, and big dreams, a commitment to hard work and never giving up, a burning desire to stand tall and give back for equal justice, to make equal justice live. Together, we must dream big, work hard, never give up, stand up, and give back. Say it with me. Dream big, work hard, never give up, stand up, and give back. We must all make equal justice live in our minds and actions and hearts, in the small ways, in our schools, in our communities, in our churches, and in the big ways with our government, our society, and the global world. I close with a song about that first lesson, dreaming big, to dream the impossible dream, because I believe big, impossible dreams are possible. Impossible dreams become real and possible if we hold them in our hearts, minds, and actions.
To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love with hearts open and pure, to try when our arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is our quest, equal justice our star. No matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for what's right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if we'll always be true to this glorious quest, that our hearts will be peaceful and calm when we ever do rest. And the world, yes, the world will be better for this, that we all, standing tall, standing up, we still strive with our last ounce of courage to reach, to reach the unreachable star.
Well, this is better than getting a Tony Award. What can I say?
So we have one more thing to thank both Judge Williams and Justice Ginsburg for, and that is that they have agreed to take some questions from the audience. So do we have microphones? Or yes, we do. We have someone back there.
Hello. Thank you so much. Should I wait? Thank you so much for being here today. My question is
Well,
one of my...
first, who are you and what are you? You're a law student? Are you a lawyer? Yeah. That helps us, you know,
Sure.
if we know.
My name's Deanna Cohen. I'm a rising 3L at Fordham Law School, so I was welcomed here by my law school. My question is, one of my favorite quotes is, the master's tools never dismantle the master's house. And I was wondering what that means to the both of you.
Can you repeat?
Could you please reread the quote?
Yeah.
By Audre Lorde, the master's tools never dismantle the master's house.
Well, I really don't know what that quote means. I mean, the master's tools never dismantle the master's
Well,
house.
why don't you tell us what it means to you?
Yeah. That's right. Let's flip this.
To me, it means that there are certain aspects to society that we have grown up in or maybe have existed since before we have existed, that in order to create equality just can no longer exist. So certain aspects of our society just that maybe sometimes people feel they need to come into and, bring other people in there with them may not solve all the problems of inequality, but maybe there needs to be a different system that exists so that there can be equality, if that makes sense.
No, well, what you said makes sense. I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. All right.
Another question, and by the way, thank you for keeping the question short. So that's, this is, any other questions from the audience? We have someone back here.
Hello? Hi. Hi, my name is Fanny Kozak. I'm an immigrant and a lawyer, and I like to do a lot of pro bono work for immigrants as well. But my question is, you talked about many, many extraordinary women who have done extraordinary things to get where they are. How about the ordinary ones? I think that a lot of the times it becomes a conversation about how much better we need to be equal. What about those of us who are not able to be better, who are just trying to be good?
Well, my view is, and I was trying to say this and maybe I didn't, I think one person can make a difference in whatever sphere they choose to work in. And so who is to say you're not an extraordinary woman for the work you do with immigrants? You're extraordinary because you make a difference in those people's lives. You bring them rights that they would not have. To me, that's extraordinary. I was using these women because you know what? These women started out as ordinary women just like you and just like me. When you look at the context in which they achieve things, they recognized they had dreams and they felt they could make a difference. But I really believe that. I do believe everybody can really make a difference, and I think you're not valuing yourself and what you're doing. I think these stories were ordinary women that did extraordinary things.
My name is Noelle Geiger, and I've been,
Maybe I can add to Anne's list a couple of other extraordinary women. One that I had the good fortune to meet, her name was Bernita Shelton Matthews. She was the first ever woman appointed to a federal district court. She went to law school at night. She was active in the suffrage movement. She told me that she would go to the White House with her sign, Votes for Women. If the police hassled her, she wouldn't say a word because she didn't want to risk having an arrest record that would impede her from becoming a member of the bar. She became counsel to the National Women's Party. That was the group that wouldn't settle for the 19th Amendment. They wanted equal rights in all respects, so they started to introduce the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923, every year thereafter. When Chief Justice Taft decided that the Supreme Court should have its own home, it shouldn't be housed inside the first branch of government, the Capitol, there was an impediment. The National Women's Party had their headquarters on the site where the Supreme Court now stands. The government insisted that it was just a ramshackle old building not worth anything. Bernita Shelton Matthews produced, as a witness, a member of the older inhabitants of D.C. who said that this building, at first it had been the temporary Capitol in 1812, when the Capitol burned down in the War of 1812. And then later it became a jail for notorious Confederate spies. And she introduced a picture of a Confederate spy. She was notorious. She was a woman. At that point, the government gave up, and Bernita Shelton Matthews won the largest condemnation award that had ever been paid by the United States up until that time. She was a woman from Mississippi with a soft Southern accent, but she was made of steel. She wasn't an extraordinary woman in having a super IQ, but she was a woman who had a determination about what was right. Well, I could add many more to that list, but she's certainly one that I would like everyone in this audience to know about, Bernita Shelton Matthews.
Who had started the question?
Hello, my name is Noelle Geiger, and I've been a practicing attorney for 30 years. And I still feel like there's a divide amongst women in that I'm a feminist and justice lives in me. But there are still other women, even in the practice of law, that are too afraid to unite and stand up, and they sit by quietly, and many are women that could have the power to reach down and bring us up, and they almost remain willfully ignorant, and it's made my battle even harder to succeed and be promoted and hopefully fight for equal pay. But I just keep trying, and even at home, the divide between the working moms and the stay-at-home moms, that was a challenge too. And how can we inspire women to unite, or should we just accept the differences?
Well, I don't think you should just accept the differences. I mean, I think that everybody that is a woman is not going to be a leader, even though they have the potential to be a leader. And some people are uncomfortable with power, and some people are afraid to use their power. And I think some of that stems from some insecurities about maybe their abilities. But I don't think that, to me, they're the ones that have the problem, not you. And so you have to find a way. It doesn't mean that you stop standing up. You keep standing up and speaking out, because one day there'll be some allies. Then the other thing is you have to get allies, not always with the women. So you have to be in a broader sort of space in order to move forward. So I would not give up. And then this whole business of stay-at-home, working, what I call working inside the home versus outside the home. To me, as someone who's worked outside the home most of her career, I have an enormous respect for women who work inside the home, and I say that. Now, there may be people who don't believe that when I say it, I mean it, but I know that I mean it, and all I can do is lead by example. You have to find those women that you think support you. You have to get involved in, the Women's Bar Association and other organizations where you have support, because you can't always find it at your job. You would like to, but it's not always there. But I don't think we can't change everybody in the world. So I try to look at what is it that I can change? Where can I affect change in my life? And I try to pursue that, and I try to get a strategy, and I have a little kitchen cabinet. I talk to my girlfriends, I talk to my male friends about approaches and strategies to move forward. But I do believe in my heart that if you work really hard and you strive for excellence, somebody is going to recognize that wherever you are. And you know what? If they don't recognize it, maybe it's time for you to move on to another door. Because I'm not a Pollyanna.
I think one of the most effective strategies coming into a legal profession where women were not wanted and speaking to judges who didn't think there was such a thing as gender-based discrimination was to get them to think of how they would like the world to be for their daughters and granddaughters. And that, I think, was an effective technique.
Question back there.
I
I can't believe I'm standing here speaking to you two. There are a lot of decisions.
Your name? Your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Maria Carrion. I'm a law student at CUNY Law School.
Okay.
Thank you. #1 public interest in the nation. I think there are a lot of moments when you're reading law, especially as a student and reading your decisions in particular, where you feel that progress is really being made. And knowing that progress is not this constantly forward-moving thing that just keeps going from one great thing to the next better thing. I think we're in a sort of moment where people feel like those big steps forward, like the VMI decision or Obergefell, marriage equality, were huge moments in American history, are sort of now being negated, and you hear people saying a lot, like, "Oh, we're going backwards," or "There's this backslide," and I would like to know what your thoughts are on how we can sort of continue at least the sense of forward movement when there's this feeling that we're losing ground. And I want to say, Justice Ginsburg, I very much admire the sort of kindness that everyone has shown Kavanaugh in the wake of what was an absolutely horrifying confirmation. But I'd like to know how you feel now, just sort of where you are, and what advice you could give us on approaching that bench if we ever are so fortunate.
Well, I'll say this. In terms of when you look at history, I think you have to look at history, and I think you have to have the long view. And there are times when things are moving forward, but there's always things move back. But see, the thing is again, to not give up. You keep moving forward. But that's why I like these historical figures. You think of somebody like Thurgood Marshall or Constance Baker Motley, or Justice Ginsburg, and these new theories and everything that she came up with to advance women in the law. Not everything was a victory. There were defeats, and I agree with you. We're in a time where we're seeing perhaps more defeats than victories, but it doesn't mean you abandon the ship. You have to keep going forward. We have to keep forward. We have to keep making the arguments. We have to keep standing up so we can advance. We can continue to make advancement. I just think I think it's the time now to dig in even more. When your rights are being assaulted or taken away, that to me means that we need to pull together, and we need to move forward with even more steam. I mean, that's my view.
A man I dearly loved said, that the symbol of the United States isn't really the bald eagle. It is the pendulum. And when the pendulum swings too far in one direction, you can count on it. It will swing back.
Hi, my name is Emma Roth, and I'm an Equal Justice Works Fellow at the ACLU Women's Rights Project. I wanted to ask both of you, so much of Justice Ginsburg's career as a legal advocate before she was a judge and then a justice was devoted to fighting for formal equality for women by challenging statutes that had explicit classifications on the basis of sex. And I was wondering what you both view as the next frontier in fighting for women's rights now that we've managed to eradicate many of those statutes.
Well, I think we have to hold on. I think we have to hold on to what we have and continue to see. I mean, we still have issues with pay equality. We still have issues with paternity and maternity leave. I mean, there's still a lot of ground that's been broken, but to me, there's still other areas we have to focus on in the area of women's rights. And I'm happy to hear you're an Equal Justice Works fellow. Yay.
I think it's time to cut it off.
So one more question, and we will have to end for the evening.
First of all, it's an honor to listen to both of you speak, and your message was very inspirational and timely for me. My name is Camille Bent. I'm a senior associate at a law firm here in the city, and my question relates to my experience currently and going forward. It seems like over the past few months, you see articles come out about the lack of diversity in the higher ranks of law firms across the country, the lack of women that make partner, especially equity partner at law firms. And I would like to know if you had any advice for women that are senior and how to stay in the game or how to take it to the next level, how to push the envelope without pushing it too far. That's my question. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think it's really important to try to develop mentors and what in most recent languages is called sponsors, people who can sponsor you in the practice, where hopefully there's someone there at the firm that you've worked for that sees the excellence of your work and is willing to help you get into the room and introduce you to clients and give you the exposure that you should have. I mean, I would look to partners, both men and women, that get you, that like understand you. And it's hard in I've just gone into a law firm, and my experience working on rule of law Africa is really a separate track than what you're dealing with. So to me, finding those sponsors and mentors is really, really critical. And if you're in a situation where people are not willing to do that for you, then that's a problem. And it's a real challenge in law firms now. I mean, I just look at the firm I'm in now, and there's several women, maybe half of and men as well, half of color, half not. And they get to that 4 or 5 year, and what they're doing is they're going to public interest jobs, going to U.S. attorney, going to clerk, going in-house. You know, they get experience and exposure in the law firm, and they're going in-house, and it doesn't have anything to do, at least as when I debriefed them, with whether they think they were being treated fairly or not. A lot of it has to do with lifestyle issues and what people are willing to put in. I think it's very difficult. I mean, I think there has to be a fundamental change in the way law is practiced. And I think you all, the younger generation, are forcing some changes on that, because issues of having the quality of life have become more and more important to men and women. So if the firm is still based on, it's all making money, but if it's based on, if everything is oriented toward making money and there's not a lot of appreciation for mentoring and bringing people along and putting them in front of clients, then I think it's a problem. So that's the best advice I can give.
The challenge for our bar associations such as this, Your Honor.
I'd like to ask all of you now to join me in a rousing brava to the remarkable, the Honorable Anne Claire Williams for this wonderful evening.
Thank you all for joining us this evening, and of course, special thanks to Justice Ginsburg and Judge Williams for your wonderful words. Have a good evening, everyone.